As the finale to the TiECON Chennai 2017, we have the TiE Chennai IIT Madras Thought Leadership Forum. This session is brought to you by DSNL. To say a few words on the annual report series, may I invite on stage Mr. Gopal Srinivasan, Chairman at IVCA. Please put your hands together as I welcome on stage Mr. Gopal Srinivasan.
Sort of whole barrel of energy and excitement that has taken place in the last 2 days. I'm glad I got a glimpse of it yesterday. Congratulations to the organizers for the stupendous work they've done. Today I just came here at the request of Professor Thillai Rajan. Professor Thillai Rajan has been leading a series of reports on the area of venture capital and private equity. Today he is presenting the 9th report in the series. India has witnessed a phenomenal growth, change, and upward movement in the venture capital and private equity industry in the last 3 years. Over 28 reforms, individual reforms of various kinds across SEBI, RBI, CBDT have taken place. More importantly, the government has unveiled a fabulous program, which is the Fund of Fund Startups. I'm so delighted that Mr. Ajay Kumar is here. He's the DMD of SIDBI. And SIDBI has been administering the program with efficacy that I dare say even the private sector would be able to match. So with that program, more than 21, and correct me Ajay, I could be out of date, or 22 new venture capital funds have received capital. In turn, now we have domestic managers who deeply understand India, who are going around making investments in Indian startups. I think this is the best news for startups, all thanks to the vision of this current government. During all these changes, academic rigor has been most important in ensuring that the effect of these activities, the effect of these investments are studied carefully. And I'm so delighted that Professor Bhaskar Ramamurthy is here from IIT Madras. They've been sponsoring these reports, and it's one source of academic rigor that we see. And so while on one hand we celebrate the startups, celebrate the successes, and we renew ourselves from the failures and get all these funds started, it's terribly important that this is studied very, very carefully. So I commend IIT on the wonderful work they do. And I'm delighted that this report has been 9th in its series. I think I've been affiliated with the last 3 or 4 of them. So I'm sure there's so much more to do, and that next year's report will be perhaps in a different area. And this year they're celebrating and studying carefully the impact of government and public policy, where India has probably invented a very unique model, but more about that when you release the report. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I request you to kindly remain on stage? I'd now like to invite on stage Dr. Bhaskar Ramamurthy, Director of IIT Madras, to join us to release the report for 2017. Joining him in receiving the report for 2017, I'd like to welcome on stage Mr. Ajay Kapoor, Deputy Managing Director of SIDBI, to kindly step on stage. With him, may I request Dr. Thillai Rajan, Professor of Management Studies at IIT Madras. Also receiving the report is Mr. V. Shankar, President TiE Chennai. May I also request on stage Mr. Chandu Nair, Chairman of TiECON Chennai 2017.
Dream, dare, do. I want you dream, so do what you dream. Dreams will work when you dream, dare, do. Dream it big, dare to go do what you dream. You are what you dream, so dream, dare, do.
Can we give it up a huge round of applause for the report for 2017, which is now being released by Dr. Bhaskar Ramamurthy.
Don't let your dreams go, come what may.
May I now request Dr. Thillai Rajan, Professor of Management Studies at IIT Madras, to kindly share with us highlights of the report.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank TiE for giving this wonderful opportunity to be presenting this. We have grown more or less parallel. This is the 9th report, and this is the 10th TiE conference. And every year we've been choosing a topic that's kind of contemporary and timely, and this year we have tried to choose the government support for startups. Don't think that a boring professor is going to kind of make things uninteresting for you. My presentation is going to be maybe a couple of minutes, and then we have an exciting panel that's going to talk a little bit more about the topic of this year's report. So what I see this essentially to summarize is there is a romance going on between the government and startups, right? So when people talk about romance, reason goes out of the window. But here what we see is a situation where there's a very strong reason for governments to support startups. I mean, just to give a few statistics, the last couple of years, starting from 2015 onwards, we have 14 ministries and departments of the government of India having something of policy regarding startups. So if you look at the state governments, out of the 29 states, 22 states have some kind of a policy on startups, right? So it's not no more a question of why should we support startups, but why not we support startups, right? So starting with the 2015 Independence Day address that mooted this Startup India and Stand Up India campaign, and subsequently we had Telangana calling itself a startup state. So the evidence is there everywhere. Government is actually trying to pull together to create an environment that's going to be very supportive of startups, right? And governments not look at entrepreneurship as goal or as an end product, but they look at more as an opportunity much larger, right? For example, entrepreneurship is seen as a tool to create employment. It's seen as a tool to commercialize innovation. It is seen as a tool to kind of create modernization. For example, if you look at the Ministry of Textiles, they look at entrepreneurship to create modernization in the sector. Right? And the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment is talking about social equality, right? How do you really kind of help disadvantaged sections of the society to kind of come out with startups, right? And then Ministry of Rural Development looks at village development and entrepreneurship in rural areas through entrepreneurship and startups. So this is really a big, large umbrella of objectives that the governments want to achieve. And the numbers are very impressive in most of the cases. Say, for example, the government has said that we're going to look at innovation program in 5 lakh schools and train 10 lakh children. Fairly large numbers. Atal Tinkering Labs have been set up in 900 schools so far. The applications for Atal Incubation Centers, more than 3,000 applications have been received. And we all know the fund for startups, the 10,000 crores. I mean, there's also another set up by the electronics deity department, which is more than 2,000 crores. So we have a lot of numbers supporting here. And cumulatively, when we looked at the various state government policies, we aggregated it. By 2022, what we want to look at is to create 5.1 million square feet of incubation space, 2,000 new incubators, 48,000 startups, and more than 33,000 in terms of venture capital, right? So as Professor Rajan has mentioned in his interview in this year's report, we tend to underestimate what we can achieve in the long term. So going by what we kind of see today, I think we'll be able to surpass these targets that are given by most of the state governments. So the way I look at policy regime for startups is like this, right? So the one end is the drive, is a very smooth terrain, a normal car goes, but then when the terrain is very treacherous, slippery, then we need to have a 4-wheel drive. So today we are talking about a terrain that's not very smooth, and then we have the policy engine that is really firing on multiple levers, right? So go back about a decade, we really look at small startups, small companies. The predominant support was financial in nature, and government used to kind of make some investments, grants, and so on, and in addition there could be some kind of procurement support. But fast forward to what's happening today, we really have a system where people are not looking at 1 or 2 levers, but creating an ecosystem. Right? The dominant paradigm of providing funding or providing procurement support has become so marginal. People are today talking about various enabling measures, creating academic and university linkages, setting up a lot of incubators, legal and regulatory measures, for example, creating fund of funds for catalyzing private sector investment, fiscal incentives for making capital investments. So essentially a whole ecosystem has been created. So if you really look at, for example, we studied one state called Kerala. We looked at for the last 12 years how the paradigm has changed, and what we really find is, from funding, the paradigm has essentially changed to an ecosystem-based measures. So I'm really going to talk about 5 things. This is the third thing. The transition in 70 years, the way I call it. In 1947, the thrust was to really look at heavy industries to drive Indian economy, commanding sectors of the Indian economy, talking about heavy industries. But now we look at 2017, looking at startups, mighty oaks from TiECON's growth. That's kind of summarizes the way the policy shift has happened. It's no longer tangible assets, but people are talking about innovation and technology-led economy. In fact, if you really look at it, most of the states have innovation policies, but essentially they are targeted at startups, right? So it's not the routine brick and mortar, not really the economy, but startups that are looking at promoting innovation and technology in the society that we are seeing today. And two prominent examples I'd like to give you. One is the public sector undertakings, and the other is the CSIR labs, right? Today, there are several public sector undertakings, and we have 10 PSUs that have actually launched startup programs. So most of them are the oil and gas sectors. Means what? So today we have support for setting up startups in sectors that conventionally are not able to get private sector venture capital funding. So oil and gas, defense, they find it very difficult to get private sector funding. These are all supported by the PSU network. Right? So the total initial outlay has been 400 crores, and they are expecting to set about 200 startups in the next 3 years. Right? If you look at CSIR labs, 30 out of 38 CSIR labs are planning to set up incubation centers, and most of them are trying to kind of provide, in addition to a little bit of funding, infrastructure, research expertise, and so on. Right? So essentially, these create an ecosystem that provide support to those sectors that conventionally fall in what is called the rain shadow region of conventional venture capital investment. And fourth, what I call when elephants come to party. Right? So public sector financial institutions. Right? So two things can happen when large organizations enter. So they can completely disrupt or they can catalyze. Today, what's happening in India is it's the entry of the large institutions is completely catalyzing the whole space. 30 public sector institutions, financial institutions have made investments in venture funds. Some of them also invest directly. Some of them invest in other venture funds to make investments as limited partners. So if you really look at most of them, about the value of this investment is about 7,000 crores, right, that they have made investment. You may think it's not very large, but then if you look at how much of they might have catalyzed, if you assume a 10% of all these public sector financial institutions have contributed, so the total investment value today would be about 70,000 crores, which is a fairly large sum. And direct investments have been in about 500 plus companies with assets under management close to 30,000 crores. So there is significant impetus and momentum that's being built up. If you look at what are the differences, most of these public sector financial institutions are investing in funds that are targeted at the early and seed stage ventures. They're not really looking at large. So for example, if you look at the last bullet point, the post-money valuation of deals where the venture funds that the public sector financial institutions have invested is about $15 million. So essentially, they are looking at providing capital in that segment of the life cycle where capital is most needed to increase the chance of success. Finally, understanding the investment DNA between the private sector and the public sector venture. So the key operative word is I have highlighted here. So public and government support startups, but when you look at private sector is seen as an investment, right? So that's really the crux that what we are seeing today. Right? Let me kind of highlight the differences, the key differences between these two. Right? What the governments think is, as we look at various interviews and discussions that we had, so deserving startups should not fall by the wayside, right? So essentially, anybody who's willing, has an interesting idea should be supported, right? But private sector look at selecting the fittest, right? They take pride in kind of looking at and supporting the successful ventures. Government looks at how many were supported, and private sector looks at how many are the winners. Government looks at the larger picture, rural development, technologies that are relevant to the nation, social equality, and so on and so forth, in addition to creating successful ventures. But what is the most primary criterion for private sector is return on investment. Let's look at some of the numbers. BIRAC, 5 years, funded 500 startups of 857 crores. Look at India Angel Network. In 1 year, in 2016-17, they have seen 12,000 applications and they have funded 25. Right? So to kind of see the selection that we are seeing here. Right? So look at BIG, right? Biotech Innovation Grant, 2,000 applications, 240 supported. So we're talking about a success ratio in the public sector that's slightly higher, close to 10, 15, 20%. But in the private sector is like 2%, 3%. Right? So there's a vast difference in terms of the way in which deals happen. IDC, for example, one of the leading, 20 years they made 60 investments. Right? They've seen close to 10,000 deals. So how do you really kind of increase the chance of success? So what we are really trying to say here, and what the report we find out is, public sector helps to create ventures. It helps to create venture funds, but then we need to involve the fund managers when they make much larger investments. So therein we are talking about fund-of-fund structures where they invest in other venture capital funds, which invest in the late-stage ventures and so on and so forth.